Welcome to another episode of Parenting Not What You Thought podcast, where we delve into the depths of parenting in ways that you might never have thought of before. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Welcome, Ellie. So good to have you here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I know that we've connected before. This is the first time meeting you in person. I really appreciate you bringing me on the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate you having you here. So please tell our listeners a little bit about you, about what you do.
Sure. Okay. So my name is Samuel. I'm the founder of Safe Telecom. Started about 8 years ago now. I was in yeshiva and people were looking for an option. The yeshiva actually were looking for an option to see how we can provide the best possible controlled environment for phones. The original plan was to use the iPhones with parental controls. That was a disaster. The parental controls broke. They didn't work. It's across the system for iPhone. And I said there has to be a better way. So I put in the work and developed our own custom Android operating system, which is not a filter. We're doing a little different than a lot of the products on the market. So we do a kosher OS device on Google Pixel phones. That's where we're holding now. A lot of siyata d'shmaya, 8 years later. And we're putting out some good products. It's also due to my role, and this is really where we connected. I speak to lots of parents, lots of yeshivas. I try to keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening within our communities and beyond as well.
Okay, that sounds amazing. It's a very, very vital service. Your reasons for doing it are also fantastic. Get right into it. I know of some stories of teenagers who really got messed up because of smartphones. Someone told me about in the neighborhood that there were a few boys that went off, and then they discovered that there was a smartphone or something like that going around that the boys were busy with. Whatever they were doing on it caused them to lose interest in where they were, etc. I know someone else who was struggling and having a harder time. A few people like this actually, because they were struggling and their friends got smartphones and they got a smartphone, ended up really taking over their life and not in a good way. I'm talking teenagers here. I'm sure you know a lot more stories than I do. Just to set the stage a little bit, I want if you are able to give us over some of what happened in the teenage years, and then we could sort of bring that down to where parents of younger children are able to take different steps to try to avoid, I should say, that fallout. But just knowing what the potential problem is really, is the first step.
Sure. I think this is the most important thing. As much as we put technology in place to deal with some of these issues, I think the main thing is, and that's why we're here, is the education, understanding what's out there, how kids are interacting with technology. I always joke that when I was growing up, so I didn't have $1 in my pocket. Baruch Hashem, we had the means my parents had the means to give me $1. It just didn't happen. Nowadays, we're dealing with kids who can technically go to any 7-Eleven and pick up a smartphone, a disposable smartphone, a burner phone, and that's how they get access to the internet. So there's a lot of peer pressure. And this is, I believe in any community. Obviously, certain communities are more insular, and I deal with across the system of communities, but we still live in the United States, or globally. There's still the ability to get these devices. So what I see a lot with teenagers is that there's a big desire, again, depending on the community, to have a device and to be connected. And it's not to do quote unquote bad things. They just want to feel connected. They want to feel part of of society. I do believe in it, and I see it. Kids want to have access to technology on a certain level. And again, I've mentioned it before, and I'll keep on mentioning it. It depends on the community. There are communities that have been successful in being, quote unquote, more insular with technology. There are some communities that, I have some parents that tell me we're embarrassed, or our kids are telling us they're embarrassed to walk around with devices. So, that does exist, and yet there's a huge element. And again, living in today's day and age, modern times, people see it. It's on the street. It's everywhere you go. That's really what I see. Teenagers, and like I said before, they're not looking to do anything wrong per se, but they're looking to have that either
Exactly.
status symbol or connectivity, certain things that they don't see as harmful to themselves, even if they may
Okay.
actually.
And what is some of the fallout that you've seen? Like, what has been the harm to? So they get it for these reasons, right? They're looking at it. It's exciting. It's technology, and and what my parents are just outdated that they think it's a problem. Fine. What happens next?
So I'm not a psychologist. That's my
Mm,
disclaimer. I got in this through
mm,
the tech side. But I'll tell you a story. There was once a kid that I learned with when I was in yeshiva. We had a eighth grade program. So boys came
mm,
from a local elementary school and they learned with us in the base measures program. Great kid, super sweet kid. I learned with him that year, lost track with him for a few years. And I saw him one day in shul during Shacharis, and he had his tefillin on and he had his head down the entire time. He had a phone. His parents bought him a phone, and he could not bring his head up, basically, to
wow.
do what he had to do during davening. And like I said, he's a sweet kid, and there was no malice here. The parents were not educated enough, I believe. And as a teenager, this boy did not have the willpower. You could talk to the psychologist, I'm sure, who could tell you how the brain forms and at what age we're mature enough to understand. Although some adults don't have that control either, but teenagers for sure don't have that
Right.
control. And he
Right.
just could not lift his head. And it wasn't, I wasn't looking at him disparagingly or anything like that, like he's doing the wrong thing, which he obviously was. It was more like, it's a shame. He
Right.
got this device. Maybe it was a gift from his parents, and he just didn't have that brain development to lift his head up during davening when he got
Right.
involved in his phone.
And like I mentioned in the beginning, that I know stories also of boys who, again, they weren't. I think it's important to note that they're not getting into it necessarily for something bad. And
Correct.
sometimes it's not even the bad. You can have a phone even with a filter, let's say, and it's not even necessarily the bad. It's like this boy might not have been looking at anything bad, but the element of the smartphone, if you're on any type of social media or anything like that, it draws you in so much, and it can take over a person's life, and that in itself could be very detrimental. You're saying that there's a lot of times the parents don't even realize the danger. Would you say it's more from the parents getting the kid a phone because the parent is not educated, like in the example that you gave? Or do you have cases where the parents know good and well that this is harmful and they don't get them the phone and the kid goes behind the parent's back, which, as I understand, is relatively easy to do, and they go and they get themselves a smartphone behind the parent's back? Again, we're still talking teens now.
Right, right. So I've seen both. It really depends on the situation. I had parents walk in to my office one day with their daughter, ninth grade daughter. She was dragging in a little bit. She wasn't too happy to be here, but the parents had bought her, I didn't realize, they bought her a phone, an iPhone, about a month before. And that's all it took. And they already saw stuff on her phone that they weren't pleased with. They walked in here and they said, we got to do something about it. They got a phone from me. Unfortunately, not to scare anyone too much, but about a month later, they called me up and they said, we have to return the phone. I said, why? We usually, it's just on the business side, we do about a 14-day return policy. And they said, this is too much for our daughter right now at this point. And they didn't want to either lose the relationship with the daughter, or they wanted to be her trusted place to go. And if they were forcing a device on their daughter, they felt that they're losing that connection to the daughter. I'm not saying they're losing their daughter; she's just not going off the derech
Yeah.
because of this. But to have that, and my wife and I discuss this all the time. Like we daven, we pray all the time that our kids should be able to talk to us about anything that's going on, and anything that we could, without being held hostage by our kids. Obviously, we have to parent them as well. But there's certain times where we'll pull back from something strategically in order to maintain that relationship and that openness with our kid. And that's what happened in this story. that we saw. On the other hand, there are other parents who are completely clueless. I mean, I've seen an element of parents as well who say, no, our kids should have full access and they should learn to deal with their desires or deal with their distraction. And I
Um,
mean, I'm not one to judge people, but I have absolutely no idea what they're talking about.
yeah.
I don't think they see too many kids except their own, and I'm not sure after a few years they'll have a good.
Well, I hope that their kids turn out okay. I will say from, you said you're more from the tech side, and definitely have with the educational side a little bit. From obviously in Torah, the way the Torah teaches us this idea of give them whatever they want and they should learn to be strong. And you do see this, in the outside world a little bit also. They say, oh, you're not strong enough to hold yourself back from, even though you see whatever, whatever, whatever. In the Torah world where Hashem, who created us, says, that's not the way it works. There's going to be temptations that are too tough for you. Your best bet is to try to stay as far away from them as possible. On the other hand, it is a very, very good point what you brought out, that every single situation needs to be dealt with differently, or rather individually. And very often we need to ask people who understand this and who understand children, what is the best way to go? It is super, super important that your children be able to talk to you. Like you said, I had Elliot Friedman on here a little bit back, and he, said that he deals with children who, like teenagers, who get involved with each other in the wrong way. And he said the biggest way to safeguard your children against that is a close relationship with the parents. The ability for the child to be able to walk in and say something to his parent that's uncomfortable, that's something that happened, that he's embarrassed of, that's uncomfortable, and he feels safe to be able to tell his parent that. That is the biggest safeguard. Obviously, there's no complete safeguard, and like you
Right.
said, the biggest thing is to daven, but that's the most shadows we can do. I heard this from Mount Islam also, that the main thing is a connection with your children. So it does become a very big question when a child is in that situation where, let's say, they have friends who are getting phones, or they themselves are struggling a bit and they feel that that's something they need. That's a very individual question that you should ask. Don't just make a blanket statement, say, we would never get that, or say, of course. Talk it over with somebody you trust and figure out what's best for you in your situation.
Right.
Okay, so we got the teen scene a little bit. There's social pressures. There's time to get behind the parents' back. There's times that they're either the teens themselves or the parents or both are clueless and they get it like that, and it could end up being very detrimental. Now that everyone who's listening to this as parents knows that this is a problem. Let's say we have younger children. Our children are not teenagers yet. They're not facing this. Their friends don't have it. They're not looking to get it. They can't get it. Is there anything that we do or any way that we act at home when our children are younger, say between the ages of 7 and 12? Does that have any effect on when they become teenagers, them wanting to get the phone, them having the ability to get the phone?
Right. Right. So it's perfect. My oldest has just turned 7, so we're right at the cusp of this
Okay.
in our family. I have a baby who's also just turned 1. And I noticed, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, most parents would probably see it, if you have a device in the house, the kids love it and they're attracted to it on whatever level. My 1-year-old baby is looking, she knows, she's pointing, she's making sounds. She can't talk yet, but she's making sounds that she wants to, interact on some level with a phone.
Right.
I
You
think,
probably knows how to swipe it also.
yeah, she hasn't gotten there yet, but she's getting there. But we try to be very intentional in my house about how we interact with technology. Now, I mostly work from a basement apartment, a basement office rather. So we have lots and lots of phones based on what I do. They're all in boxes, but my kids don't come down to the office, purposely. We make sure that that's mostly off limits. Um, I'm sure you've heard from lots of people, and this is not from the tech side, but the way we interact with our devices and the way we interact with our kids while we have our devices is extremely, extremely important. If we're on our phones all the time, the kids will see that. They think it's important, that they're this is a common thing that I see both on the parenting side and on the tech side. It's the reality of how life is nowadays. I don't think, while a flip phone or A more dumb phone can solve some of this, obviously. Your kids are not grabbing your phone to do 5 million things, but they still do see there's a certain interaction with devices. I know that I deal with some Hasidic communities, and the way I describe what they're looking for in a device is basically, we used to have a phone on the wall with a wire. That same phone and all the abilities that it had and all the abilities it did not have, it could be in your pocket nowadays, and that's about it. And that's one type of relationship with a device, to put it on one side of the spectrum. On the other side, there's all kinds of things. My wife did not have one of my phones when we got married. Her iPhone got smashed. She didn't smash it herself, but it got smashed. And she said, it's time to move over to a phone. And when my oldest daughter was already starting to look at her phone, and the relationship now that she had with her phone was, you can't do everything. You can't watch videos on the phone. There's no videos. There's still some family videos on the phone, but we were able to say, like, mommy's phone doesn't do that, or Tati's phone doesn't do that either. And that's a very powerful message for the kids. Like, yes, it's a device and it could do certain things. And yet it doesn't do those things. I mean, another big thing that we instituted at home was, during dinner, there's no devices. And these are basic, I learned in a big Musar yeshiva, so these are basic things that but even to chazer over them, that what are we doing? What are we doing by dinner? How are we interacting with our kids? And, as opposed to our devices. The restaurants, everyone uses this example. You walk into a restaurant, a modern restaurant nowadays, and you will see certain families on the phone. And that's something the kids pick up, and they know, and they want it if they see it.
So let's dive into it a little more, because you're saying amazing points. And you know what? These are good points, even for not about technology in and of itself, but just about the connection with your children and giving attention to your children, and not busy with the phone over the kid. Now, I even had made a post on LinkedIn about a potential client called me, and my kids were noisy in the background, and somebody messaged me saying that's not a good look for a parenting person that is on the phone when the kids are around. Now, everybody's on the phone sometimes when their kids are around, and I'm a big believer in being normal, so I wouldn't portray myself as, never taking out my phone when my kids are around. But I get his point. His point makes sense. Let's dive into it a little more. So let's say you have a parent who has a smartphone and they don't have one of Esamuel's devices. Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't, maybe they can't, maybe whatever, right? But they have a regular iPhone. And I'm sure it's filtered, or something's locked down, but there's a lot that's accessible on it, and maybe they need that. But they have young children in the house, so the children will see that the phone is their parents' phone, right? Whenever they're going to make a phone call, or they're going to drive somewhere and they're going to put on Waze, whatever it is, this is the phone that's coming out. So even if they're intentional and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're not taking it out by dinner time, and it's not overriding their time with their children, but still, this is the phone that they always see. And I'm going to get to people who don't have this in a minute. Now, this is the phone that they always see. What is something that they can do to help their children understand that this is not something that I'm running after? Like you said, the screen is enticing. The smartphone looks exciting, and they want that. And I'm going to go a drop more into it, because when they do get a little older, and they're turning 13, 14, 15, and they have some friends that are getting it, or their independent streak is kicking in, and they're saying, I also want to be like a Tati, like a mommy, and I want that as well. Is there a way that a parent can actually train their child in a healthy usage of their device from a young age, to help them realize that allure is not as exciting as it seems to be, or we can't do anything more than daven?
Daven is always important, as we said, but I think the small things, even just showing the kids. I've had parents who come in, and say, "Oh, I don't put a pin on my phone, because I want it to make it easy to access for myself." And I'm not saying more directly answering your question is not put a pin so your kids don't access it. It's showing that intention, showing that this phone is something that I need to get into when I need to use it. I think it's extremely powerful. I think also, and we've seen this before, I'm located in Queens, New York, and we just opened up a new tag office, kind of like a rebirth of the tag office. And one of the things that they're doing is working with the schools to see if they can come in and talk to the kids. I always say, and if you see me on LinkedIn, I always say education, education, education. As much as I do a device, and as much as I have a tech company, the main thing is if you don't need to touch the phone, don't do it. And know what you're giving your kids, and therefore your relationship, and as a result, your kids' relationship with the devices will follow. If your kids know that this is for me to be connected and to do work, and I do work on my phone. We have customer service that runs, the whole day basically. So that's something that's, yes, important, but it could be presented in a way that, well, again, each kid is different. As you could probably elaborate more, each kid is different. The relationship is different. The days are different. The hours are different with the kids, but as a general rule, I think those small things that you do to show that intention, I don't want to discount that as being a huge factor. The phone was always on the wall, as I mentioned before, and yet the kids were not running after it. It was a very functional tool. Either with what I'm doing, with our safe telecom devices, or again, it depends on the family, but or what you're doing by having a flip phone, or by not having a phone during certain times. All that stuff shows and extremely powerful to the kids that this is something that's done intentional. I mean,
It's a very interesting point that you're saying that what you're basically doing is you're teaching your children about your relationship with your phone. So it's not so much about like making it more exciting or less exciting or teaching them how to use it responsibly. It's more giving over what your relationship with your phone is. That's a tremendous, tremendous point. I don't think I ever thought of that. You know what? Let's take that a step further because let's say somebody has a flip phone, but they're tied to it. Every second, whenever they get a call, right away they're answering the call. They're always making calls, and when the kids are always pushed to the side because they're always on the phone, they're always texting, and there's nothing going on their phone. It's just call and text, but they're tied to it. So according to what you're saying, what would be with that? Like that would be also like your relationship with your device is not that great.
correct. Correct. Now, the function of something like a flip phone, or the function of something, again, on levels, the function of something like our phone is to empower the parents as well. We're all human. You mentioned before, we all have certain desires. It's what they call it. They call it doom scrolling now in the secular world. Just scrolling on the phone. I know there's certain initiatives in the more Amish communities. They only have a chatzi touch. I don't know if you heard this term, where it's only partial touch. They actually don't want scrolling even on dumb phones because there's a certain already drags you in. And again, I'm not a mental professional, but I've seen it. All those things are how do you use it? How do you present it to the kids? And yeah, a dumb phone could be just as dangerous. I mean, adults, I know we're not talking about adults today, but adults can be drawn in also. I've davened in a shul where I saw one guy, he was checking his Chase Bank during Chakras. Now, maybe he was, maybe he was waiting for Chazar shots. It's obviously not the time to do it either, but he wasn't actively davening, I guess. But like, what are you doing? Be intentional. Right. And that really shows to kids as well.
That's an amazing thing. So you're saying it doesn't matter so much. I mean, it couldn't matter obviously what type of phone you have. You kept on repeating that the less you have, the better it is because obviously there is less of an allure. But you're saying the main thing is relationship. I mean, your relationship with your children, obviously, and your relationship with your phone, and that goes over to your children. They see what kind of relationship you have with your phone and that goes over to them. Now they may say, okay, you're very attached to your flip phone. I want something a little more exciting, but if I'm going to be quote unquote married to the phone, it may as well be something more exciting than what you have. You just picked a dumb thing to be connected to always.
Right,
So
right.
that's a pretty dangerous. Right. That's a pretty dangerous point.
Yeah, I don't want to discount the educational side of it as well. And like I said, I think some tag offices are doing some initiatives like this where they'll come in and they'll talk. I've spoken with secular organizations that do the same, and they have parent curriculums. I'm doing this in the firm world. There's a Dr. Eli Shapiro, I believe, who's doing this, a digital citizenship project, and there are other organizations that do this. And I've recommended those people, whether on the Jewish side or the secular side, to different schools that are looking for that, because the kids should know as well. So yes, there's the modeling from the parents, and there's an intentionality from the parents, and kids are still kids, and they get drawn by things, shiny objects. Phones are shiny objects. So having that, if you do get it, be aware of what is there, and the pitfalls, because even an innocent kid, you mentioned this earlier as well, even an innocent kid can get drawn in unassumingly. The kid who picks up that phone in 7-Eleven, which we're not going to prevent all of them from doing, what are they going to do with the phone, or what are they running to do with the phone, or what are they falling into the trap of with the phone? That's a very, very relevant conversation for I'll call human kids. Yeah.
Even a child who was modeled well by their parents, but there's some peer pressures, and when it's accessible, so they could fall into that. So you just mentioned about the education, about talking to the children. So you spoke about on a school, on a community level, on a school level. What about a parent who wants to have that talk with their child? What kind of message should they be giving over? What would you consider the most crucial points of such a parent-child talk?
I think it's that really the emphasis of what we're using devices for. This is a tool. This is what mommy, what tati, what we need in order to communicate with the outside world, whether it's for business, which helps, feed us and clothe us, or whether it's for emergencies, or keeping in touch with family, which is also a beautiful thing. And however we use that now, whether that means WhatsApp in order to keep up with families overseas, I'm not gonna take that away, for sure. We offer that on my platform and in a more controlled environment, or whether it's just making those phone calls. Again, the emphasis here is the device is not necessarily, the type of device is not necessarily the problem. It's that, as we were saying, the relationship with the device. So I think the easiest thing for kids to understand is, what does this device mean to me? What should it mean to you? What's a healthy relationship with the device? What's a healthy way of viewing this device? And I always make the distinction: what needs to be in your pocket and what doesn't. And I deal with this with adults as well. So someone ran to me. It's a good parenting story. Someone ran to me at one convention that I was at. I had a booth, and I didn't know who she was at the time, but she mentioned her name, and I had spoken with her a few months earlier. She told me, "You saved my kid's bedtime." I said, "What do you mean?" It's a pretty bold statement. She said that I used to have a regular phone, and I could not stop myself from shopping at a local supermarket while I was putting my kids to bed. And she struck me as a very well put together woman. She was, I'm sure she loves her kids. It was just something that she was drawn to as she's putting her kids to bed. And the kids obviously see that. She got one of our phones. We didn't offer that app intentionally. And she says, "You really saved bedtime." And this is stuff that does pay us, that just, it pays dividends over the year. This is now something, you're giving over to. It's a whole different type of bedtime. Bedtime's so important.
That's a beautiful story. That is beautiful. You mentioned in the beginning different communities. There are some communities that are more insular, some that are more open. Now, I'll tell you, I had a client of mine who was upset over their children's internet usage. This was not a smart device or a phone. Children were young, but in the house they had a computer and the kids were on it, and they didn't like it that the kids were on it too much. So they sort of just said no more, right? They took the whole computer, they put it down to the basement, and they said no more. And I told them, you can't really do that, because if all the kids in their class are on it and all their neighbors are on it, you tell them no more, they're going to the neighbors fast. It's not happening. What you need to do is you need to set responsible limits. You could make it a reward. You could, say only a certain amount of time, only add a time, but you can't just knock it out. So you could have control over it, but you do have to recognize the environment with which in you live. Somebody else who would deal with a lot of other people who the classmates and the neighbors are not on it at all. It's 100%. There's no reason why you're exposing your children to such a thing. So the community and the environment definitely makes a tremendous difference. And I can see on one hand where you have a community that's very insular, that for certain children that's great, and for certain children that might present more of a hardship because they're more rebellious types. That's where they're going. That's where they want to flex those muscles, so to speak. On the other hand, the communities that are more open. So on one hand, that could be a problem because the kids are having the devices readily. And on the other hand, the more rebellious types are not necessarily going in that direction. What advice can you give for both types of communities? On a parent end, where they can recognize, I mean, obviously you spoke a lot about the education piece, but on a parent end, what should they be looking out for? What should they be concerned about?
Right. So it's a very good question. Yeah, it comes up a lot. First of all, if there's a community that has people who are off devices and more present in real life, that's beautiful. And I've definitely seen communities like that. For the most part, that works for those communities. Like I mentioned earlier, there's someone called me up and said, I got to get rid of my smartphone because my kids are telling me that they're embarrassed for me to walk around with a smartphone. I don't know if those kids won't be challenged later in life, but definitely right now in their environment where they are, that's a beautiful thing that the parents are going to be more present. The kids are in a safer environment, and that's great. But be aware. That's my advice for that side. Be aware, because again, we are in Gullus among the the big wide world out there, basically. So it's always important to be vigilant and to understand. And even a kid that has said that before to parents, that I'm embarrassed for you to walk around with a smartphone. At a certain point, they may change their minds, to put it diplomatically. They may just change their mind later on. So it's always important to be vigilant about that. On the other side, the parents that have the kids. I mean, I had a parent that told me that in 8th grade, all the girls got together one day in his daughter's class rather, and they said, "Oh, everyone's parent got them an iPhone." And it wasn't true. All the girls said that day that they're going to go home and say the same thing to their parents. And some parents were fooled. We don't always have to take these things.
When every kid comes home and says, everyone, find out how many everyone's.
Right,
A lot of them go, ask the kid for names. Who?
right, right.
Yeah.
And speak with the parents. And yeah, it is a lot of pressure in certain times, in certain situations rather, but just do that due diligence. I think, and that's on that side where everyone's technically getting it, but it's not necessarily the case. Not everyone is getting it.
What would be some signs you would say that you're saying to be vigilant, look out for it? What could be a sign to a parent that their children may have a device that they don't know about?
So I would leave that more to the parenting experts. I don't see that mostly in the tech side that much. And even the parents that I talk to are not really there. I mean, they come to me already. Yeah, I've seen as a parent, obviously, certain things, and I've seen from the tech side. But yeah, I would leave that more to them. But there are, I'm sure, there's certain behaviors that you can see, certain changes
Right.
in mood and in regulation, stuff like that.
Basically, a good general rule is if you see a drastic change in a child's behavior with no clear explanation for it, speak to someone.
Right.
That sometimes it could be an indication. It could be an indication of various different things, and sometimes it could be nothing. Sometimes they're just growing up and the hormones are kicking in and whatever.
Right.
But just speak to someone if you see drastic changes that you don't know why. Okay, any closing thoughts? I mean, this has been phenomenal. I think there's so much information here. Any closing thoughts, funny stories, anything like that you want to share with our listeners?
Um, Let me think about this one. Yeah, I think the only closing thought is again to emphasize what we're saying. There's so many different people out in the world, and as a parent, as me personally as a parent, even just taking out what I do you know to know that this is a huge discussion, a huge topic. I'm sure a lot of people are very interested in hearing about this.
Yeah,
It's all of our, I think recently today actually I mentioned to someone, this is our job as parents to be aware and to make those connections and to understand what we're doing and what challenges our kids are facing. I say thankfully Baruch Hashem, we're people our communities are very education oriented, kid oriented. we want to raise the family. We want to raise it right. We have the Torah to guide us in the Mahalchim from our Masorah, how we raise our kids. There are people who are less fortunate than us. I always know. I live in New York City, so I see people on the street corner who are selling fruits. They just came over the border. This is how they have to survive. It's not a political statement. It's just how they're surviving, and they're so they're working all day. They have kids strapped to their back, and not even in a fancy kid carrier, just in a shmata on their back, because this is how they do. And those parents, unfortunately, don't have the resources to educate their kids properly and to I say be on top in a good way, to be aware of their kids and their development. And we're so fortunate in our communities that we have that ability to or it's emphasized. And for the most part, obviously, everyone has their challenges. Every family has their own unique challenges, and every community has their challenges. But to for the most part, we're so fortunate that we have the guidance from the Torah, from the Masorah, and B, the sense of community and the sense of family, that we're able to recognize this and to have discussions and to come up with real solutions, together. And just to be on this podcast and to talk to you and to have that opportunity. We're doing something about it. It's not just talk. We're actually doing something about it. This is this is where it's at, and this is our
That's a very great point. Well, thank you so much, Esamuel. It's such an honor and a pleasure to have you on, and I sincerely hope that this will be a tremendous benefit to many, many of our listeners. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Parenting Not What You Thought podcast. I truly hope that this episode has been beneficial for you in your parenting. Please let me know either in the comments or by sending me an email at boruch, that's BORUCH, at bmaparenting.com. Have a wonderful day.